Okay, in this next video tutorial, I'm going to show you how to UV layout this blade or this sword which I've just created. Now this sword is made out of 3 parts, so I can show you how to UV unwrap these 3 parts. Now if your sword is actually combined together as one piece, you can still UV unwrap them, and so that they can occupy one UV space or one UV texture map. But in this example, I'm just going to keep it simple by separating all the components. Now to make it a little bit interesting, I just want to modify this blade a little bit, because some of you have been asking me questions on how to create a circular hole on a subdivided object like this one. So I'm just going to show you how I do it. Right now this blade is subdivided. It has 2 halves already joined together as shown in the previous video. So I'm going to first start by selecting the 2 opposing faces like that, and then holding down the shift key, right mouse click, and then I'm going to extrude the face. However, I'm not going to pull the face out or anything like that. I'm just going to offset the face so that they are slightly smaller. Okay, so that I can tweak the size of the holes later on. You can also hold down to Control and then click on the blue cube here to adjust the scale. Right, that's pretty much the same thing as the offset. So once you're happy with it, okay, you can just hit delete. Okay, so once you hit delete, you will notice that you have a nice big hole, okay, that goes through, okay, the blade, and now you can see that the blade is hollow. So we need to patch up these edges here. If I press number 1, you can see this is what the hole looks like. I'm going to go back to subdivision by pressing number 3 and then going to vertex mode and manually drag a box over the 2 vertices and move them until they form a circle. So I'm just going to eyeball this, just move it until it forms a nice circle. Okay, once I'm happy with this, I can switch back to the subdivided mode, or rather the base mode, and then switching over to the edge, and I'm going to select both opposing edges, and I'm going to use the bridging tool, holding down the shift, right mouse click, and then choose bridge. Now make sure your bridge divisions is set to 0. Now if you want to set it to 0, make sure you go to your mesh tools. Okay, I beg your pardon, it's under, let's see where it is. Where's the bridging tool? There you go. Bridging tool is under edit mesh. Click on the option box. Make sure you set the division to 0 and then save the settings. Otherwise, it's always very annoying when you bridge and there are multiple divisions. You need to switch to 0. So I'm going to continue with the other edge. Now I have an overlapping edge here, so I'm going to use subdivision to help me. I'm going to press number 3. Then I'm going to select this edge, holding down shift and select this edge. And because I selected bridging previously, you can press G, and since this bridge option is open, I'm going to just click on bridge. Okay, make sure you select the correct opposing edge. I'm going to press G to use the last use command, holding down the shift to select the opposing edge and press G. So now I got a nice hold, and if you do not want it to be tapered, you can insert edge loops. Okay, I'm going to use my insert edge loop tool, which I created a shortcut here. If you don't have it, okay, make sure you go into edge selection mode, holding down the shift, right mouse click, and then choose insert edge loop tool. So I'm going to insert one edge loop close to, okay, not here. Okay, just go to non-subdivision. I'm just going to insert one edge loop right about here, another edge loop right about here. And to make the hole really clean and tight, I just want to insert one edge loop here and one more edge loop here, so that when I subdivide this, I got a nice hole. Okay, that is clean looking. Alright, like that. Okay, so I got the hole cut onto my blade already. So let's start to do the UV unwrap. Now before I do that, in order to have the UV layout done nicely for this blade, okay, the condition if you have any holes on your blade is to have a center line. Now because I have already a center line or center edge loop that runs nicely around my blade, it will make the UV unwrap or the UV layout of this blade much easier. However, in order for this to be separated successfully into 2 shells, I need to insert another edge loop that runs across the hole here as well. So go to Insert Edge Loop and click on the option box and make sure you choose multiple edge loops and switch it to only one, because if you set to this setting and if you click on the center of the hole's edge loop, like for example here, right, not here, let me just go to before I subdivide. If you click right here, the edge loop, right, will be positioned right precisely at the center. Okay, so sometimes you need to switch between the subdivided look and the base model. Right, so now I am satisfied this condition. It is much easier for me to subdivide this. Okay, let me just go back to object mode, and we'll do our UV layout just for this blade. So we need to open up our UV editor. Now you can see there is already a UV assigned to this blade. I'm going to delete the UVs, okay, and then I'm just going to apply a UV just to give it some UVs first. You can choose any of these three projections. I'm going to choose planar. Okay, so right now I have a planar projection that is based on my perspective view. Now if you go to the right view and you choose planar projection, UV, and hit planar projection, you will get the projection nicely laid out. Now some of you might end up with a UV projection looking like this, okay, where your blade occupies the entire UV space of this texture. So if that is the case, please make sure that your UV planar projection settings is changed to these values here. Alright, make sure you change it to camera, and then make sure you enable keep image width and height ratio. And once you project it according to this view, it will retain the exact same aspect ratio, and the UV will not be stretched. So now that we have given it the proper UV projection, we want to split it into the two shells. Okay, for example, if you want to have textures on both sides, okay, for instance, right now on the front side here, the letters UV1 appearing in this checker pattern is showing correctly. However, when you go to the other side, the letters are flipped. But since we only have one giant UV shell, we need to split this UV into two. So to do that, okay, let me just turn off this checker pattern first. You must go to edge mode, and that is why your topology is very important. If your topology is not done properly, you will not be able to select the continuous edge loop that runs across the blade here. So in this case, I modeled the blade in such a way that when I double click on the knife edge, it runs precisely across my blade. So with that condition satisfied, I can click on UV, and then I can cut the UV edges. So once I cut the UV edges, I have two UV shells. So if I right mouse click in the UV texture editor and go over to shell, I can just click on one of the shell, press W to move, and then I can separate both the shells. Okay, it seems that the shells are not really separating. That is because I have not cut the center edge loop here. So I'm going to go back to my edge selection. I'm going to double click the center here, and then I'm going to go to UV and cut the UV edges. So once I've done that, I'm going to go back to shell again, and this time it separates into two. The reason why it didn't separate earlier on is because I did not cut the center edge here. So once I've done that, I'm successfully separate the two UV shells. So one shell is pointing this direction, the other shell is pointing the other direction. Now I know that this shell on top is the correct one, as in pointing the correct orientation, because if I were to move it and enable the checker pattern, I can see the words, the UV and 1 showing correctly. Okay, so I'm going to move this shell up. Now if I select this bottom shell, which is the other side, and I take a look at the lettering, you'll notice that the letters are now pointing the opposite side. So we need to use a tool here in the UV texture editor to flip the UV in the U direction. So I'm going to click on this button, and now you notice that the checker pattern is or rather the letters are showing correctly in the correct direction. So I'm going to switch off the checker pattern, and let's take a look at the two UV shells. So now these two UV shells are occupying the UV space within this square here. So in order to make them occupy or make the best use of space, I'm going to rotate one of them until their edges, the sharp edges, are basically facing the bottom of this edge is facing the bottom of this edge. So I'm going to use the rotation tool in the UV texture editor, click it a few times, and then I'm going to move it until it is lined up like so. And now you have done your UV layout. So I'm going to switch back to shell mode again, select these two shells, and then I'm just going to move them down. You can try to scale it down slightly. So once you have these layout, you can actually export the layout to Photoshop, and then you can start to apply textures to it. So for the rest of these parts, okay, they are quite straightforward. Now, because this handle started off as a cylinder, it already has some cylindrical UV mapping applied to it. However, the aspect ratio or the projection, the scale is wrong. So I'm going to go to the right view, and I'm going to apply a seam by double clicking on the edge loop here, and then I'm going to go to UV, and then I'm going to cut UV edges. And then I'm going to try to apply a UV, and because it's a cylindrical shape, I'm going to apply a cylindrical mapping on all the faces. First I'm going to select all the faces, and I'm going to apply a cylindrical UV mapping on it. Okay, right now the orientation of the UV map is incorrect, so I'm going to turn it 90 degrees, okay, so that it will unwrap nicely. Okay, so now I have the handle UV unwrapped, although the top and bottom isn't mapped according to the projection that I want. So for the side, it appears to be okay. However, the top faces here, I'm going to try to reproject them. Okay, I'm going to go to the front view. Okay, and then I'm going to do a planar projection. So now the edge, or rather the back of the UV handles is selected. So I'm going to click on UV, and then I'm going to use a planar projection, and I should get the shape out that I want. So I'm going to put this aside. Now for the other side of the cylinder, I'm just going to, because this side, let me just take it out. No one is going to see the faces here. Okay, I'm going to delete these faces away. And just hit delete. Okay, so now I'm just going to select all these faces here again, and hopefully reapply another cylindrical mapping. And in order to rotate the cylindrical projection, you need to click on this red handle here so that you can activate the rotation. So rotate this about 90 degrees. Okay, so then now I can just scale this. I can turn on the checker pattern and see whether the amount of UV space is applied accordingly. It seems to be correct. Not too much crazy stretching going on. and then I'll just scale everything down slightly and move this to a side. Okay, then finally to this this block here. This one started out as a half a cylinder. Now if you want to unwrap this, okay, you have to assign edges specifically to this shape here. Now let's take a close look at this shape here. So it looks like a box that is being curved. Okay, actually I actually created this out from a pipe object. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to select the edges, then I'm going to use the UV unfold to flatten out the this wrist guard. Okay, so I'm going to click on the edge here. Okay, I'm going to double click to select this edge, shift and select to double click and select this edge. Okay, I'm going to press 4 to go to wireframe mode to help me a little bit. Okay, so I can see that there's a selection mistake here. I do not want to cut the wrong edge, so I'm going to click elsewhere. So I'm going to double click this edge to select this edge. Holding down the shift, double click to select this edge. I'm going to zoom in a bit, double click to select this edge. And I'm going to hold down the shift and double click to select this bottom edge here. And I'm going to do the same here. I'm going to shift and double click to select this edge. So wherever there's a selection to the edge, these will be unfolded in the UV space, or rather these, you can imagine these as cuts. Okay. Alright, so far so good. This is the edges which I want. So I'm going to click on UVs and then I'm going to select cut UV edges. Now I'm going to select all the entire object. Okay, I'm not going to select the blade. I'm just going to select this object, and then I'm going to try to UV, and then I'm going to unfold it. And you can see now it has unfolded. Okay, everything has been unfolded nicely. Okay, you can try to reset the unfold. Okay, I'm going to try to reset the unfold settings, and everything is pretty much default, and then I'm just going to hit apply. Okay, so this is the best Maya can do to unfold. Okay, there are a bunch of tools in Maya which you can straighten out the UVs, but I'm not going to show you that right now. But this is what you can do to unfold this entire piece here. Okay, so the basic layout for these parts are done. Now imagine if all these 3 pieces are using the same texture material, you would have to arrange the shells nicely so that they all occupy the same texture space without overlapping on each other. Now for that, I will show you in another video. So hopefully this demonstration will allow you to understand a little bit more about UV layout.